Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So I'd like to start by offering my greetings and welcoming everyone this evening. So here in Canada right now, it's full on into the holiday seasons. It's just a couple days till Christmas, and uh, and this time of the year, quite a few different religions and spiritual groups have some kind of holy day, some kind of holiday day. There's this time of the year, there's Hanukkah. I think right after Christmas, around Christmas time, is Kwanzaa. Of course, Christmas is the big one here in Canada. And but unfortunately, as Buddhists, we don't have a Buddhist holiday or a Buddhist holy day around this time of the year. So I thought, in the spirit of holidays and special days, um, I thought I'd do something a little different this evening. I thought this evening, for being just a few days until Christmas, I would give a little bit of a Buddhist perspective or a Buddhist twist on the kind of famous Christmas story of A Christmas Carol. So, of course, A Christmas Carol is not a Buddhist story. Charles Dickens, he wasn't Buddhist. He At that time in England, he probably never came into contact with Buddhism, though I'm not sure. And but in his story, A Christmas Carol, I think there's some really good themes in it, some really good Dhamma themes, or at least some themes and something that we can, take Dhamma out of and look at it through a perspective of Dhamma and through a perspective of Buddhism. So um, I'm going to hopefully try to remember the details of the story as best I can. I grew up in a family where Christmas was a very, very big event. It was our biggest event of the year. And so, growing up as a kid, I probably saw every different version of Christmas Carol out there. So, some of my details might be a little off, or might be, a little more of the ones that from the, '90s TV movies. So, Christmas Carol, it starts with Ebenezer Scrooge, and Ebenezer Scrooge is miserable. He's not a happy person. He's a very miserable, unhappy person, but he's a successful person in terms of the world, in terms of his success in the world. He owns a his own company, as far as I understand it, a successful company. He's quite wealthy, quite rich. He's supposed to have quite a large house, which even has servants and, a cook and a maid and all that in it. So as far as, you'd look at it from the outside and you'd be like, oh, that's a lot of worldly success there. But he's not happy with it. And so this is one of the teachings, or you can take from this, and this will come up as a theme throughout the story, is this idea that, money doesn't equal happiness. Possessions don't equal happiness. I like to say, your happiness isn't in your wallet, or your happiness isn't in your bank account. It's in your heart and in your minds. So even though he has all this money, he has all this success, he doesn't have the happiness from that. But it's not to but it's not to say sometimes it can get misconstrued, and you can think, okay, well, if is what Ajahn Nando is saying here is, you know rich people are unhappy and poor people are happy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that happiness isn't, true happiness, deep happiness isn't dependent on external things like that. So even the last king of Thailand, King Rama the Ninth, he had this project called the sufficiency economy. So he was encouraging people to practice contentment and practice contentment where they are. If you've got a lot, be content with that. If you don't have a lot, be content with that too. Just in this way to encourage people to be happy and not to just, get into this lifestyle and this kind of way of living where you're just constantly all you care about and your main goal is just acquiring and getting more and more and more. And so so again, this is one thing which comes right at the beginning of Christmas Carol. You see how unhappy Ebenezer Scrooge is, and and he's greedy. He's really greedy. He's so greedy and so stingy to the point that he doesn't even spend it on himself. It's not like he's stingy on using fuel for his fire, for heating his house, stingy on his own food. So you can see this sometimes. He's just so attached and so greedy and so wanting to get that he won't even spend it on himself. And then, as the story progresses, his old business partner, who had been dead for years, Jacob Marley, comes to visit him. He's a ghost, and he comes to visit Ebenezer Scrooge, and he's not doing so well. He hasn't had a good birth. He's a ghost, and he's really suffering because of this, because he had done a lot of unwholesome things in his life. He was just as much of a cutthroat, cold-blooded business person as Ebenezer Scrooge was. He didn't have good morals. He didn't have good sila. He didn't practice dana. He didn't practice generosity. He had never worked on developing merit or developing goodness in his life. So he had, he didn't have a good birth. And so, again, and that's, he's coming to see his friend Ebenezer Scrooge to warn him, don't do what I did. You've been even worse than I am. You're going to get even worse next life. So, he came to warn him. And so again, this is a really great reflection on, karma, on, our actions have results, and the idea of trying to do good, trying to do meritorious things, keeping sila, practicing generosity, developing our minds and that inner happiness. And but one of the things I think is really good to note here too is Bob Marley, for or sorry, Jacob Marley, not Bob Marley, Jacob Marley. He he was just as miserly and miserable person as Ebenezer Scrooge was, but he still cared enough about his friend Scrooge to come and visit him and to come and try to help him. So I think this is a really good thing we can reflect on, is that, you know, no one is wholly bad. There's no one who we sometimes like to categorize people and think in terms of absolutes. So sometimes we like to think that person is just bad. Everything about them is bad. I don't like them. They do bad things. But this is a great way to show us that even the really bad people, they still have some goodness in them. Somewhere deep down in them, there is a little bit at least of goodness. Bob Jacob Marley cared enough to help out his friend Scrooge. And I remember a talk by Lumpur Sumedho, and it was from the time when Pol Pot had died, and Pol Pot had been the head of the Khmer Rouge and like the dictator in Cambodia, and he was not a good guy. And a lot of people died because of him. There was a lot of suffering, and a lot of terrible things were done because of him. But Lumpur Sumedho was reflecting, when Pol Pot was a kid, he was actually like in Thai they call it dekwat, like a temple boy. Like he had used to go to the monastery and hang around the monastery, and so at least he had at some point in his life there had been some goodness, and some shred of goodness in him. So that's I think is really good for us to note. And so he comes and he warns, uh, Jacob Marley comes and he warns Ebenezer Scrooge, and then he has the these different spirits are going to visit Ebenezer Scrooge. And the first one is the spirit of Christmas past. And of course, there in Buddhism we don't have a spirit of Christmas past. Past that one we can't do. But it's important. But it's interesting because he takes Ebenezer Scrooge back to the past, and Scrooge sees himself when he was younger, And you see that Scrooge wasn't like that. You know, he was a kid. He had a very difficult home life, but he was just a normal kid, and then he became a young adult and started working, and he got himself a fiance, and he was just a very normal person, a nice guy. He wasn't after wealth. He wasn't that really greedy, stingy person he became. But over time, that started to change, and he started to get more and more and more into greed and just wanting money and wanting to accumulate. And as this went on, he alienated himself from everyone in his life. He was getting more miserable and more greedy. And so I think, again, there's some really good Dhamma points we can get from that, is that when we practice Dhamma, one of the things we're focusing on is this um, idea that we can develop ourselves, we can improve ourselves. We these qualities of mind are stuff that we can develop. We might not have much of it to begin with, but we can move forward. But this also shows us the fact that we can also go the other way. We can go backwards too. It's not just a staircase where you only go up. You can go up and down. And so as Ebenezer Scrooge starts getting greedier and greedier, it starts building, and his mind and his whole life starts going in that direction. And and it's another really good reflection on craving, on tanha. And, the Buddha said that tanha, this is the second noble truth. This is the cause of suffering. And is this that this uh, this craving. And so he has this, this craving for wealth and power. And and in the third noble truth, the Buddha talks about the way to get rid of tanha, to get rid of this craving, is to abandon it, to put an end to it. Whereas, Ebenezer Scrooge is doing, what a lot of us in the world, just kind of that worldly uh, kind of instinctual approach to it is, when we have craving, we want to alleviate that craving by indulging in whatever we're craving in. But that doesn't work. Craving isn't overcome by craving. Luang Por Cha had a good story about this. When he was young and he was practicing, he really liked mangoes. So he tried to experiment to see if he could overcome his craving for mangoes by eating mangoes, and as many as he could. And I forget the number. He just sat down and started eating mangoes. And I think it was like 38 mangoes or 70 mangoes, something like that. Like he'd be completely full. He'd even vomit, and then he'd just keep eating more mangoes to see if he could overcome that desire for mangoes. And I'm sure for a couple days afterwards, he probably wasn't really into mangoes, but it didn't get rid of that desire. A few days later, he wants mangoes again. He still likes mangoes. So, this was a way for him to really uh, investigate that craving can't be overcome by more craving. And so, so we see that in Ebenezer Scrooge's life and in his development in the Ghost of Christmas Past. And then he moves on to the Ghost of Christmas Present, and who takes him around and shows him um, different Christmases and different people in his life, what they're doing in the present moment. And he goes and he visits his nephew, and he goes and visits his employee, Bob Cratchit, and their families, and sees them and sees that they're actually really happy. They're having a good time. And to him, he was shocked by this because he was much richer than they are. So, he's like, what are they doing? They're not rich, but they're happy. They're having fun. And it starts to hit him, starts to sink in that um, you know, like I was saying earlier, your happiness isn't based in doesn't come in your wallet. It comes in your heart. So he sees that, and again, this starts to affect him, but not to the point where it's like he's going to change his life yet, right? So it's like he needs something a little deeper, something a little more profound to change his life, and that's with the last of the spirits of Christmas. The spirit of Christmas is to come, and this one, takes him into the future, and and at this point, he's dead. So this really becomes to him this like reflection on death, which is a really powerful reflection. And and seeing that, oh, I'm going to die. All my stuff, all my money, I can't take that with me. All the people around me are just going to take that, and I'm going to die. My everything I've been working for and stuff, it just means nothing in the end. um, and then he'll just probably end up like uh, Jacob Marley. But and then after this, he that's such a profound experience for him that he actually um, goes back and he changes his life around, and he really embraces trying to be a good person. He starts developing metta, like loving kindness for other people, starts developing compassion for other people. He starts practicing dana, starts practicing generosity, and really helping other people out. And this makes him happy, and then he has a happy life, and then like all stories, happy ever after, and the rest of his life is all great. I know it's only a story, but it's also it's very interesting that in this story, he had these three spirits coming and showing him these different things to elicit this change in his life. Whereas in the life of the Buddha, before he went forth from the palace, when he was still living as a prince, a very luxurious life, he encountered these four things. In Pali, we call the Devadutas, which are like the divine messengers. So he had been lived a sheltered life, and he leaves the palace and he sees a sick person because he'd never seen sick people before. He had his dad had purposely sheltered him from these, and he sees sick person, he sees a dead person, and then he sees uh, an ascetic like a monk. And these four things, seeing these, you know give him that deep change and change his life. And this is what encourages him to go forth from the household life into homelessness and to start practicing and to become enlightened. It's that same thing. It's hitting him. Oh, you know I too am going to get old. I too am going to get sick. I too am going to die. And so oh, and look, there's a monk. There's an option for working beyond, to go beyond this. There's an option for putting an end to that suffering, putting an end to that um, constant rebirth. And and so being Christmas time and the Christmas holidays, I thought maybe I'd just offer that a little Buddhist reflection or a Buddhist twist on the Christmas Carol story for everyone tonight. So I'd like to offer that as a bit of reflection this evening.